And now I'm very excited to welcome to the show for the first time an NFL and football contest guru in Mr. Las Vegas Chris. You can follow him on Twitter at Las Vegas Chris. Chris, man, thanks for finally coming on the show. How's the summer been treating you?
It's hot. It's tough. It's tough to drive a convertible when it's 117, but somehow I'm making it. It's a pleasure to be on your show, and we've been basically pen pals on DM for I don't know how long, and today's the first time we've actually spoken, so very nice.
Long time, man. And, finally we have something up your alley here because the NBA is starting to fizzle out a little bit. Golf's running hot, but we also have NFL coming up, and that is what you are exceptional in. And I got to tell you, Chris, I almost wore a Hawaiian shirt today to try to match up with you a little bit. The good news is that I outgrew them. Okay. So people don't have to put up with that, but I like to be on the same mindset as some of my guests here. So I know that's one of your trademarks. You look fantastic. So it's just, something that I was thinking about doing, but I checked and I'm like, oh, my Hawaiian shirts are from like the 2000s. And I'm not sure if they're going to quite fit me. I might have to lose a few pounds, buddy, before I come up and see you. But either way, we have a lot of great stuff to talk about, Chris, because it's contest season, and contest season means it's Las Vegas Chris season. And why don't you tell our viewers and our listeners a little bit about the contests and your impeccable records?
Well, I've been very fortunate enough to have pretty regular success over the last decade plus in cashing a lot of these contests. I think the first major contests were back in 2011, won the Palms Pigskin, won the Win Eliminator. That was a one winner only. I've finished first and second in Golden Nugget. Their weekly tournament for season long. Last Man Standing College won that one a few years ago. Knocked out the final week of the season several times on the NFL Last Man Standing. Last 2 years, Circa 2 years ago, finished 20th and 31st out of 1875. And last year had great success, finishing second and fifth with my only two entries.
That is just amazing.
And fortunate enough to have a combined winning percentage of 64% with all my entries. So I'm getting very lucky, and good fortune has shown its light on me. So just hoping to, it's not all luck. You have to put yourself in a position of luck, but it's been fun. And I know I have to work twice as hard just to hopefully do just a little bit worse. So.
Well, your reputation is impeccable, Chris, and hopefully some of this will rub off on us, viewers, listeners, and me, the host, of course. And did you mention a college contest in there? Who's tipping you off?
Oh, well, it's only 12 weeks long. So, see, I seem to do well in college every other year. So last year I was 50-50. I think I lost juice. So I'm due to have a good year in college this year again. So
there you go.
It's very inconsistent. Sometimes, some years I have a good year, but Last Man Standing is just picking one game. So that's a little bit of a different game than picking 5 games with the Circa Millions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that is. Yeah, picking one game a week is certainly different. And is the Last Man Standing like a Survivor format, or is it ATS?
Last Man Standings are on the half points, one game per week. So the last time we got knocked out on the final week of NFL was the Thanksgiving game, Washington and Dallas, a few years ago, when Washington botched the extra point and lost by 8 instead of 7. So that's how we didn't get the 100,000 there. So a little frustrating.
Yeah, for sure. I bet, man. Well, great stuff here. I haven't played that one, but why don't you tell our listeners about some of the contests that are in Las Vegas, and obviously mention which ones are the two, I guess, main ones that people like to get in.
Well, the last man standing is at Stations Casinos, and that's a cheap one. I mean, if you're not doing that one and you're in town, I don't know why you wouldn't. It's $25 to enter. You buy 4 entries, you get 1 free, and it's really simple. Pick 1 game a week until everybody's gone. So they have one for college, which has $100,000 guarantee, and one for NFL, which has $150,000 guarantee. So I always do that, and usually somehow do okay in that. I don't know what it is, but we do okay on those. Aside from that, we've got the Golden Nugget contest this year. That is a $1,000 entry, and that has a different format because it combines the NCAA with the NFL. So you can use any combination of 7 NCAA NFL. That one is a little bit favored toward people that are good in college, obviously. I think for people that are good in college, more people are good in college than in NFL. So it doesn't matter how good you're doing in NFL. I think you're going to be at a real deficit if you're going to try to just do NFL. So you've got to either be both good at both or college to win that. That's a pretty simple format. I'm not sure what the payout is. I think they might be paying the top 10 places, and it's 100% return, and you can play on the app. You don't have to go downtown. So, and the people down there are very friendly. So that's always a good contest to play.
Yeah, a guy like me would definitely put more college plays out on there, just because that's been my stronger suit over the last 6 to 7 years at least. Of course, there's been maybe 1 or 2 of those years. The last maybe 6, 7, 8 years, I probably did better in the NFL. But just in general, in college, I'm better. Maybe because I pay attention to it a lot. Maybe it's because I'm such a big college football fan. So I definitely see what you say there. If you have an advantage in college, you might want to go that. But I can just think about a guy like you. That's 64% over those years on the NFL. I'd be almost using all my NFL picks if I was getting in the gold nugget, for the most part anyway.
Well, 64% probably is not good enough to win the Golden Nugget. I don't think it. I think I've seen 71% hit that. Although I think the last time it was lower, like 66 or 67. But you're going to have to do college. As I've considered taking, if I do it, maybe take a partner and possibly do that. But it's difficult. I just don't know what to do there.
Oh, it makes sense. Well, let's talk a little bit about the main NFL contest then. What are the 2 big ones in Las Vegas for any listeners that don't know?
Well, the Super Contest is going to draw a lot more people this year than the last time out. COVID kind of mucked up their program the last time. Traditionally, they were 1,500 an entry. They've changed it down to 1,000. And they have also added, I believe, 6 mini contests. I think, or maybe it's 9 mini contests where they're doing 6 3-week contests and 3 6-week contests that also kind of pay nicely. And most important, they stopped taking a rake out. So it's 100% payback. So I anticipate them getting a nice amount of people in. And I haven't competed in the Super Contest in years because they were taking 6 or 8% out. And, why be a part of that? That's just too much to be taking out. It's not poker. Mm-hmm. So
makes the expected value lower for sure, doesn't it?
Yeah. So they just don't want to be a part of anybody that's taking money out of contests. There's just no reason to get it to support them. And so just happy that they're back in the mix of it, and happy I don't have to drive down to put the picks in. They also have the Super Contest Gold, which is a $5,000 entry, and that only has 1 winner. So I'm not a big fan of that format of pick 5 every week, one winner. I think, and for that amount, I think they should have changed it to 3, because you can just get brutalized down there at the end. And I would prefer different flexibility of picks rather than a fixed 5 per week for that format.
You could be that guy that takes second every single year, right?
Yeah, I think they could restructure it, but nevertheless, that's a quality contest. And if you're looking at the consensus plays, each of these contests release their consensus plays of what everybody's picking. And over the years, the consensus for the regular Super Contest, it's okay, but the gold is at a higher level where you could just look at what the consensus is at for the gold contest and just play those every week. If you don't have anything to play, just run with that. Those actually do pretty well.
Here you go. I mean, sharper plays, in my opinion. Less people, higher money. People care about money, so they're going to be more invested in it. So that makes total sense to me, Chris. Another thing I noticed, Westgate, and I'm not sure if they did it last year because I left the Super Contest for the same reasons you did. Went to Circa last year. I'm seeing $1,000 buy-in. I thought I remember a $1,500 buy-in.
Yep. So they lowered the buy-in to 1,000, which is going to definitely help them. And it's I'm sure maybe Circa probably wasn't happy about that. So but who knows? Competition is just awesome. It keeps everybody sharp. And the 2 big remaining contests are obviously at Circa. They've got the Circa Millions, which is a pretty simple format, 5 games per week, $1,000 to get in. They've got a minimum guarantee of $4 million. They pay 4 quarterly prizes of somewhere around $180,000, and then they pay a booby prize for last place and some quarter prizes for best and worst for certain periods of time. But pretty good, and they pay a lot of places. So if you can't win it, you've got a lot of opportunity to back into some various selections there. But you're limited to those 5 per week. They've got the Survivor, which was certainly the most popular last year. They have a $6 million guarantee on that. And that one's going to be close to an overlay, possibly. It's actually trailing in entries currently, but we're way too early to make that call. But you can have up to 6 entries in that. So the entries can accumulate fast. If people start buying 6 and 6 and 6, but that's a 1-winner format. We use 1 team per season, and Thanksgiving is an extra week. And if I'm not mistaken, maybe Christmas is an extra week, so that there's an even 20 weeks. And there may even be some super bonus, I think, of another $1 million or something for if you can make it through all 20 weeks. I can't remember that one, but I didn't play the Survivor last year. I wish I had. I didn't know everybody was going to go out first week. So, but the important thing to remember, though, is if anybody is playing these private eliminator contests at home or Survivor contest, don't enter it if you're going to just do this, bet what everybody else bets. You can't win, Yeah, you can share, but you can't win. And you really have to try to think outside the box and comfortably be willing to take risks along the way, because at some point the math dictates you have to make choices that are painful, that are going to put your entry in jeopardy. But you don't go into these contests just following the herd. Be your own person, do different things. Don't take those 17-point favorites because too many other people are, and you want those to go down. And we saw that with the Rams and the Jets last season.
I was hoping you'd bring that up because that was about to. And
well, I had actually put on Twitter the week before it was Seattle and the Jets, and I pointed out to people. I had a lot of people contacting me last year, for advice and stuff. And I told everybody, don't take Seattle. That's the let everybody else take Seattle. Why would you want to advance with all those people? Because if they get knocked out, you have gained so much equity. If 80% of the people are knocked out or 90% of the people are knocked out, you're getting 10 to 1 odds increased on what your equity is. So, and it didn't work that week with Seattle, but the very next week against the Rams, sure enough, Rams lost. So just a week early on that advice.
Well, one of my contest plays was week 1 playing Jacksonville against the spread against the Colts. And just because their record at home was so impeccable against the Colts the last 5 years, it's something you look at. It's not everything, but it's just part of the handicap. Of course, it's the first week. Not a lot of information, a lot of guessing game coming on. But apparently the Colts to beat Jacksonville on the road was one of the biggest survivor plays out there. And that's what killed everything. And that's probably why me and you were both like, well, I wish we had more entries in some of these. And what I've always thought about Survivor is unless you're playing almost the max amount, you're really at a disadvantage. I don't know how true that is, and I haven't done math on it, but it's just much easier to have more outs towards the end of the season, isn't there?
You know what? It can get pretty complicated. There's a lot of moving parts in Survivor and Eliminator contests. And just thinking, this just popped into my head for people playing at home with private contests and stuff. It's extremely important to make sure you know all the rules. And I mean all the rules. I found rules that in Circa that were changed this year because I found rules that should be changed. And you're going to find, especially in these home games, you want everything thought of ahead of time. You want to know what the time deadlines are. You want to know what the chain of the information is. And if the person is running the pool, is there an advantage for them to know everybody else's picks ahead? Of them selecting the picks. So how is the honor system monitored? Because, if the people running a major pool aren't accountable in some other way and monitored, the people running that pool could be playing by the rules, but have a huge advantage knowing what other people are doing. Mm-hmm. So it's something to remember and consider when entering those private contests. But getting back to what we were talking about, there's a lot of moving parts in these eliminators, and you might have team play. You might be facing people that could be part of 40 entries. You might have, each person can get 6, and maybe you can only afford 1. That really limits your options. You have to consider all these factors going in, and all the more reason why you have to be different, because anything mainstream and regular and predictable is going to be covered by many, many, many other people. So, if anything, I be willing to go out early. I mean, that's the best piece of advice that I can offer is it's a lot better to be sitting pretty at the end of those with lots of options than to be limited at the end with the same thing that everybody else saved. So
no, I agree 100%. It's a situation, I mean, if you're not as invested as other people and there's only limited options for you, you are a massive disadvantage. So it's very strategic to go through this whole thinking process and how you want to develop your plan to attack this contest, right? And it's different. You have to expect that you're just trying to get yourself an advantage over people going out sometimes more than just picking the best game, right?
There were several times last year that the game was absolutely irrelevant. And an example, the Thanksgiving game, you had Washington and Dallas. You're talking about a 2-point favorite, which is basically, close enough to even money, close enough to a coin flip. So that doesn't matter. But what you knew for sure was that Dallas was going to get 75 to 80% of the picks in that game. So no matter what, you had all the games are coin flips. You have to take Washington because you're getting 3 or 4 to 1 equity increase if you move on. And if you're just riding the herd with Dallas, well, you just moved on with 80% of the people. Your equity barely went up. So
from a survivor standpoint, or
yeah,
from against the spread standpoint, or both, really.
Against the spread, it didn't matter, but you're always looking to gain equity in those survivor pools, and you want to evaluate what other people are going to be on, and try to stomach being on the other side of those games or avoiding those games.
Yeah, Thanksgiving week was quite difficult because you had to make a play. I think
there were only
those
2
games. Yeah, and that's a little bit of a turnoff, in my opinion. It just puts more variance into what could happen rather than just making it on your decision making, and brings more luck into it. So, wonder if that's going to change this year.
No, they're doing the same. They've got the same Thanksgiving week and added a Christmas week, I believe.
Okay, well, if that's the case, then I definitely stand by my statement earlier about having more outs and having more entries. If you don't want to spend $5-6 grand on 6 entries, maybe that contest is too big for you. Maybe you go to a private contest that's $100 a piece.
It's really important that whatever contest that you do, you can afford it. I mean, you really need it to be screw you money. You need to consider it an expense. It's already spent. Because
absolutely,
you can't be sitting there worrying about, I don't want to go out. I got all this money invested in it, or I've got this equity into it. I don't want to, I don't want to go out on Jacksonville or something. You just can't. You have to just not even think about it and just play the game without having any of the money concerns.
That's what I tell everybody that just goes to Vegas in general to have fun. I say, you bring a bill, you kiss it goodbye. Say, this is $5 grand, whatever you want. This is what I'm going to lose on this trip. Anything more than 0, if I bring back, I'm going to look at it as a win because I had a great time.
Well, I'm gonna strongly disagree, because the last comment I'm ever going to make, and what I always tell people is, if you are coming with the attitude of I've got $5,000 to lose, just take that Uber right back to your house, okay? Because you've got the wrong attitude. If you're actually using that mental terminology in your brain that I've got this money to lose, you're already predispositioned to blow it.
My friends, and I was more talking about people going to Vegas to have fun, more or less than an investment opportunity.
No, it's a matter of positioning it in your way of thought. Because if you tell yourself I've got this much to lose, you're actually validating it and encouraging it, and you're going to be a little bit more reckless because you've already filed it away as a loss. That's how the subconscious works. You're enforcing a losing mentality, and you have to position it to, I have $5,000 to play with. You have to change the wording in your thought process and your thinking. You never say, I have this to lose. No, because you're going to lose it.
Okay. And to be honest with you, that's how you would approach when you play the games, for sure. Anybody that can't afford to lose money is probably what I was trying to make an example of, shouldn't be gambling on less than 50% expected value situations like craps, blackjack, and things like that. And that's the situation is what I was talking about. But I think
I know. It's a small little slip up and that nearly everybody uses. And I nitpick it because I'm a real mental attitude type of guy and subconscious and habit type person. And your mental outlook changes the way you reprogram your thinking to be. So
Great
if you
stuff.
keep having this lose word in the back of your head, you're going to do it. You're going to.
Don't get in these contests thinking you're going to lose. Get in these contests doing everything that you can to win. And I think that's a great point, Chris, and very well said. Getting back into the Circa and the Westgate Super Contest, obviously, people like me that's been following the Westgate for so long looked at the Westgate, just like everybody else's in the past, as the gold standard. This is what makes you the champion of sports betting in the NFL. Now the Circa comes in and it's much better. There's no rake. And I looked at it and I switched. The question that I have, and this is a very general question, it's probably rhetorical. What do people look at now as the most prestigious contest? Like, if you're a radio host, who would you rather introduce? The winner of the Super Contest, the winner of the Circa? What do you think is looked at as, I guess, the better win?
You know what? I think it's along the lines of when you've got two great teams and both have shown a little bit of spunk, and you don't really know how it's going to play out. Right now, it looks like Circa has the edge because they're offering the huge guarantees. So, I mean, by default, they're guaranteeing the most amount of money. The Super Contest has a long history and a tradition, and it's respected. So you have to respect that also. And they showed their spunk, and they're not rolling over, and they don't want to see Circa take that away from them. And if, however, this year pans out, if it doesn't pan out the way the Westgate wanted it to, maybe they'll change it again next year. So
yeah, very true, very true. And so I actually personally think that the Circa kind of caught up. I think it doesn't matter. I think you mentioned one of them. The Circa rivals it, is what I'm trying to say now.
Yeah.
For that, and especially having the new lavish hotel with a big stadium swim type situation that they've been advertising. A huge sports book has done wonders for them, and they have some good partnerships, obviously, as well in Las Vegas. So either one, pick your poison. I'm glad the Westgate stepped up, because it would make me think twice if I decide to go into that one as well this year. But I'm pretty sure I'll at least be doing an entry into the Circa. Why don't you talk a little bit about some of your strategies without giving up too much information? You had 2, I believe, entries in the Circa last year. You took second and you took fifth. I can't even imagine how that's possible. Like, if I had 2 entries, I almost just envision it as maybe I'm going way different every single week. But I guess if you start hot, you might be able to start mimicking each play. And you did ask me a question on text about how many times that your plays did match up, and that one had made me scratch my head for a while. So could you talk a little bit about strategy with having multiple entries in the Circa?
Well, there's a lot of people that get 2 or 3 entries. 3 is the max on the millions. And I noticed so many of them had the same 5 every week. And sure, I can make a case for, if you're there at the end, that gives you a little bit of maneuvering room. But, if you've got 3 of them and you're putting all 3 of them the same, that's what I wasn't understanding with the handful of people that had 3. And because you've got these mini contests, you could separate and actually do better with one of them. To me, it didn't make a lot of sense. I understand why they do it, but to me, I've always played them separately. This last year, the one that finished in 5th was actually in the 2800s. The one that finished second didn't have a losing week until week 12. It only had one losing week the whole year. But the other one was a mess. It started off 1-4. It had another 1-4 along the way. And I used, between the 2 years, I've only matched 1 ticket each year. So out of the 17 weeks, only 1 ticket is matched. And then 50% of the weeks have 3 or fewer matches. So I'm only matching 65% of the plays. So 35%, it's making me select almost 7 games per week. It's like 6.6 plays per week I'm having to select at that rate. So, but it allows me to do different things. And I did win the second place for the last quarter with the one that I had to do crazy stuff and take risks to make a big comeback. So it's an example. If you're doing two different entries, hey, you can catch lightning in a bottle with one of those quarterly prizes.
Yeah, absolutely. And I noticed that for me, when I've been in the contest, the last 2 years, I was closer to the 50%, which was pretty, I wouldn't say out of it, but by week 9, 10, week 11, I had to switch it up a little bit and go a little bit against the grain and maybe take different plays than some of the sharper consensus, and that was my strategy. And it made me finish probably around 50%. Maybe someday in the future it won't, but I think that's similar to what you did with your second one to bring it all the way up to fifth, right? You thought out of the box a little bit and went a little bit different, because truly, if you have 10 to 13 games going on, depending on bye weeks, you can still be right 10 times, right? On 10 against the spread picks. So I thought that was a very interesting thing to bring up.
Well, and it comes, there's a fair amount of weeks that you feel, I don't know about this week. So there's a case to be made for wanting to have that spread out and saying, I don't want this team on 2 tickets instead of I want this team on 2 tickets. So sometimes it's a defensive posture also, but almost the same advice applies to Millions as Survivor. You don't want to be following the herd. It's not as crucial in the Millions. It's okay to match on some of them. You don't have to be different on everything. But if you're going to be following line moves, a lot of other people follow those line moves. You're not going to gain ground. You're not going to separate from the pack if you're doing what other people are doing. But having to select 5 games, you're not going to be able to avoid doing what other people are doing. But you just have to make it part of your thought process to be different so that you can make gains. And the inverse would apply if you somehow had a big lead. If you had a big lead, well, now you want to find those games that are going to attract people. Now you want to consider those line move games. And kind of play a little bit of defense. And the strategy changes depending on, what point of the season it is and whether you're behind or ahead.
Great stuff. Great stuff. Makes total sense what position you are on to decide which picks you're going to play depending upon the betting consensus. Love it, Chris. Great stuff. What other strategies could you give our listeners that you incorporate to some of your plays?
Well, one of the things that I do that I think is good is I just wait to select. I try not to. I try to just absorb as much information as I can throughout the course of the week, and I mean, there's always going to be a couple of games I know I'm going to be on. As far as contests go, I wait to the last minute, and I try to just absorb as much information as possible. And I don't worry about what I'm going to select. Why am I going to worry about what I'm going to select before I have to? The injury situation is a nightmare. If you're not paying attention to injuries and you're surprised by them, well, you're not going to stand much of a chance. You've got to find a way to keep up on this stuff. And it's without exception, every week you're waiting until Saturday mornings for that information. So why even bother thinking about it before then?
When is the last minute for some of these contests?
The deadline for Circa is 3:00 Pacific. And I should mention, you don't have to be a Vegas resident or a Nevada resident. You just need to fly in and sign up, and you can have proxies submit your picks for you. So you're not excluded. And for the people that don't know the answer to this, the reason why none of these contests are in multiple states at the same time is because each state has their own regulations, and they're all different. Every state has different rules, regulations, approvals, and such. And even though Circa is in multiple states and Westgate's and Super Contest is Superbook is in multiple states, they can't combine them. So there's the quick answer why they don't do that.
Oh, great stuff. We spent a lot of time on this, so I'm just going to get to the last question. Does fading the public in the past, it's been somewhat of a successful thing, not to do just from a sports betting in the NFL perspective, but also in these contests, is fading the public just in general still a viable option for success?
Well, it's since we're on contests, I'll answer from the contest viewpoint. I have a different answer when we talk about NFL betting, but in the contest, yeah, you damn well better be figuring out what you think other people are going to select, and either decide that you're okay with that or intentionally avoid those. So I definitely am spending time figuring out what the herd is going to be on. And it doesn't mean I have to avoid all those games. I just need to know how that's going to affect my plays, and is that what I want to do? And do I have any options?
Right. So basically, doing that in general is not going to make you a winner. Is probably the answer that I would say. I think I heard that fading the public only gets you around the 50 to 53%, at least when it comes to last year's numbers. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the public might have become a little bit more educated just because the freedom of information and how easy it is to get information and how people are learning more about sports betting.
Well, these contests cost more, so the general person is going to take it a little bit more seriously than in the past. Back in the day, when they used to have these $100 contests and such for Leroy's and some of these other places, there used to be a system where you would enter everybody's, because they didn't used to give you these consensus. People used to manually do it, and it used to be a great play to fade them, because back in those days they were awful. So it paid to do the work to find out who what every entry is on and total it up and just fade those top five. And that was a huge winning system for a long time. And that's not the case anymore. People just take it too seriously. They have too much invested in it. And there's a fair amount of parity. So,
absolutely. So, just to end it, the Thursday night game, you'd have to have a pretty strong feeling for a game in order to play that, because once you get that entry in, you have to have them all in by then. One thing I do know is Friday's injury report that comes out around maybe 1, 2, 3 o'clock Pacific time for all the teams is a key thing for me. So if anybody's making picks on Friday morning, it's a very bad strategy to do that, because there's the main injury report gives you the best idea of what's going to happen, even though there's still going to be a lot of questionable. Is that accurate to say?
Yeah, for the most part, picking Thursday games during the COVID season was, you didn't want to do that. I mean, you just really couldn't. I only did it one time, and I had to, because it was my lock of the week, and it was one of the best plays I had, strongest plays I had up to that point. I'm like, I have no choice. And it's torture, because if you lose that game, you have to live with that misery for extra days, and you're just glum, and for a fact Friday and Saturday is going to bring out more injury news or COVID news or weather news, and you're just stuck like a pig. And but if you win that game, it certainly feels good going into Sunday already 1-0. So you just have to be pretty darn sure about your play to put it in on a Thursday, and hopefully this coming season we won't have the same COVID issues, so it won't be as much of a barrier.
But won't they still be testing for COVID, these players, constantly? Because that's the thing that gets me the most, because of not only false positives, but people that aren't even sick test positive, right? And we don't know if they would spread it or not. Maybe they would. In theory, they would. But there's a lot of people held out in COVID that weren't even sick. So if they're doing that again, then yes, I think it would be a much bigger concern. Have you heard anything about that?
Well, I feel safe about it at this point, because we have a long track record. We haven't had any. We had the Vancouver situation and one other team in hockey, but for the most part, we've skated by it pretty nicely. Mm-hmm. A couple of NCAA basketball delays, but for the most part, it's been pretty good. And I think the vaccination rate is very high, although we're finding out that the vaccinations may not be working. So that might be something that develops in the middle of the season. Mm-hmm. And but but I'm optimistic. I'm optimistic that it won't cause the same uncertainty and complete and utter chaos that it caused last year. I think we'll be better prepared.
All right. Well, so am I. And hopefully we're going to have a clean season here to make our decisions a lot easier on us for these huge football contests. Let's transition into the NFL a little bit then. And I'd like to ask you this, and this might be hard to answer from your perspective. I don't know, but the NFL has been called the most efficient market. That's just another way of saying it's very hard to beat or to make a profit compared to a lot of other sports. And my thoughts were always that college football is easier just because you have a much bigger variance between the teams, more numbers, between Alabama and New Mexico State, 70 points, right? So, just in general. But apparently this has just become very, I would call it easy for you being at 64%. Why is that? Why are you so good at the NFL?
No, it's for the last 3+ years, I'm at 61%, which is an absurd record, and it can't continue. It won't continue. It's not like I'm a brain surgeon and I've got the magic formula. It's, I work really hard, and it takes getting lucky. And I just recently went through every single play from 2020 and 2019, and I'm charting it in dozens of ways. I'm charting by teams, by underdog, favorite, every possible configuration you can imagine to find some patterns so that maybe I can get some filters to keep my average up. But going through these games, you remember these games. You remember the lucky breaks. You remember the bad beats, but I remember a lot of lucky breaks. So, if you're betting 100 games, the difference between 62 and 58% is just 2 lucky bounces, maybe, or 2 penalty calls, or you have to be lucky. You have to be lucky. So that's first and foremost, and just work your ass off and always adjust. I had difficulty when the scoring elevated, and that screwed up my models, and I had to make adjustments to what I was entering, and I had to change the values of certain aspects of my inputs. And so I had a really mediocre, I think, 2015, and I finally got it on track again. And I am confident that it's going to do well, and I think it's going to be really good because I'm going to now have filters. I already have filters for next year that lower my volume, but keep the win percentage up. But anything can happen. Everybody's models and systems go south. So at some point in time, people catch up, or it just stops to work. So you just have to work hard. Don't rest. Don't for a minute consider that anything's guaranteed.
Yeah, and I'll tell you right now, 61% is unheard of to keep going. But if anybody can do it, Chris, I think it could be you, just for all the hard work and absolute passion that you put into this. And I'm sure anybody that feeds off your information, whatever you want to give them plays, is very happy for that. And you've proven it year over year, time over time. So just wanted to make sure that our listeners know that. Moving on to the next question. Do you notice that betting futures are sometimes just based on narratives, I guess I'm going to say. And I was going to question you, like saying people ignore fundamentals, but that's a very general term. Why do people bet on teams that are trendy? And why do people fade teams that have an unfavorable narrative, for example? And I know this is kind of a complicated question, but I've always wondered this. What makes people do that? What do they base it on? What are some of your thoughts?
But with that question, what team has the most consecutive overs, season win totals in a row, and which team has the most consecutive unders in a row? I mean, neither one of them are going to be a surprise. So it's working to go with the good team and fade the bad team. You've got the Bengals at 5 years in a row, and you've got Kansas City at 8 years in a row. So it's not always trying to do the opposite. Sometimes you can win doing what seems to be the obvious.
Right.
But I mean, for futures, I'm usually not in the country. This is actually going to be the first year that I'm actually in the country. I usually come into football completely blind, and I think it's been in my favor. And I'm a little bit worried that I'm going to be predispositioned for this and that. But the more I'm processing it in my head, I'm not as worried. But as I see people betting futures, I look at the dozens and dozens of ways that things can go wrong. Whereas a lot of people are thinking of all the things that are going to go right. And football has so few inputs. So each game is so important. So let's say you handicap your team and you think you've got that team nailed. Now you're facing all the injury issues, a bad bounce, turnovers, things that are completely out of your control for that team. Well, what about the other teams? I mean, what happens if the narratives for other teams change, and now playing Team A isn't the cakewalk it was because somehow Team A won their first 3 games and they were supposed to be 0-3 or 1-2. Now you're getting their best game, and you play them twice early when they're playing with that confidence. What happens on these other teams affects your team significantly on such a short schedule. And every year, what do we have? An average of 5 new playoff teams every year that are completely unexpected. Mm-hmm. So there's just so many variables. To me, there's just better ways to get my money in each week. I mean, I want to base it on what's going on. I got to fade 4 weeks of preseason injuries. I got to fade trades. I've got to, bad clubhouses, arrests. I don't know what the hell is going to happen. I'm not saying there isn't good value to be found, but everybody just races to the window with this stuff. And I just don't understand why. And I mean, I put in a couple here and there, but boy, it's just afterthoughts.
I like your way of approaching it because it goes back to everything that you kind of said earlier. People go based on narratives and it develops momentum and there's disposition. Well, you came into the NFL season with zero disposition is some of your most successful years because you're just kind of attacking it from your own mind and where you thought, and you didn't have to hear some of that noise. It's just so interesting to me.
I'm going to tell you, I was listening to a podcast yesterday and I'm sitting here telling you guys, why I don't do it. I'm listening to a podcast and I'm thinking, God, this guy's an idiot. Why is he not prepared? I can't believe it.
It wasn't mine, was it?
What?
It wasn't my podcast.
Not that time. But so I'm like kind of laughing at the guy, and then a few minutes go by, and he's talking about a team, and I completely forgot that I just dissed this guy, and I'm like. And he's saying what I kind of think about the team, and I'm like, yeah, that guy's on the ball. And then I'm like, I shake my head. I go, what are you doing? You were just calling this guy an idiot. And the only reason you're liking this is because he's agreeing with your subconscious narrative, and you're liking him, and you're liking what you're hearing. So I try to avoid any predispositions as much as possible. Just show me the data, show me the facts. Let me look at the exterior happenings at that point in time and make my decision then. Because when you're buying futures and you need a team to win, you will think about it and it will come into your thought process. Well, I don't want to bet against that team because then I'm rooting against my season win future or my division thing. And it's too tough to beat the NFL as it is. You don't need that added nonsense filtering in your brain.
It's so amazing how the mind works. And we don't notice this when it's going on. You don't notice that you're just looking for confirmation bias, your approval, right? You're looking for to feel justified in your subconscious, and you don't even know it. You know,
I read a book recently on habits, and it's estimated that between 40 and 45% of what we do every day is a habit. And if you actually think about what you do every single day, it's mind-blowing, the repetitiveness each and every day. And it goes with your thought process. You don't even know it. And it's so strong that it's ingrained even in people's memories that have amnesia. They'll remember habits, but they won't remember people and events and stuff like that. So you have to be aware of it. And answering your previous question, what helps me is a consistent schedule and habits. Don't break routine. What works when you get on a roll, whatever you're doing, stick with it. I think winning and losing is contagious. And you have to recognize how you benefit and prosper, and you have to do the things that you're getting benefit from. And that applies to everything that you're doing, but certainly with football betting, I don't think the average person realizes it's more than it's a triple digit an hour a week job. It is absolutely all day, all night, every day. And you're waiting for lines, you're waiting for injuries, you're waiting for any stupid tidbit. And all that time, you don't even want to sleep because you got too much crap to do. And it's never ending. Yeah, there's times when, the games are starting already. It's Sunday at 1:00. You've had how many hours to do it? And it's like, well, the games are starting already. So it never ends. So you have to make sure your routines are organized and not causing conflict and problems.
That is some fantastic advice. Everybody, make sure you follow Chris at Las Vegas Chris. This last segment is going to be a little fun for me and you because we're going to get to clear our minds a little bit. Yeah. And we're going to talk about every single NFL team just for a few seconds. And I'm really excited to hear what you have to say. And I'm hoping that you agree with some of my things that I have to say. But this is going to be a good exercise.
Well, wait, yeah. It was something that popped into my head that I thought was really cool because I haven't thought about it. I mean, there's probably like 3 or 4 teams. I probably know what I'd say. And that's what gave me the idea. But 32 teams, lightning round, you got 10 seconds to say whatever pops into your mind. It could be a strategy. It could be a complaint. It could be a compliment. It could be useless, whatever. But I think something interesting comes out of it somewhere along the way.
Yeah, well, I'm excited to do it, man. So let's start then. And I'll let you get started. I'm looking at the NFC North, and I don't have any notes in front of me. The only thing I have is just a list of the teams right here. So I'm going to let you start, and then I'm going to give you my ideas as well after you're done.
Okay.
Start with the top, Green Bay Packers.
I think Green Bay should dump Rodgers. He's 37 years old. They can get a lot of value for the guy. It's 2 great seasons in a row, and the relationship has soured each of the 2 years. I don't think the fans will miss him that much.
Great stuff. I think with the Green Bay Packers that if Rodgers didn't play, the team would be better than what people think of coming in. And I think if Rodgers does play, they won't be quite as good. Just of some of the bad ill will that's been going on with him, management, that's probably going to filter into the coaches. Let's move on to the Chicago Bears.
I'm one of the few that didn't like their draft day move. That team was falling apart on the offensive line, and their defense faded heavily. I just am not optimistic about the Bears.
As a Bear fan, I should probably opt out of this question, but I just don't think Nagy's a good coach. So I'm really concerned about that. And I think their defense is starting to get old. Their offense is definitely going to have to be significantly better if they want to make the playoffs. Let's move on to the Minnesota Vikings.
I hate to agree with the masses, but Minnesota had some bad breaks. They didn't. The defensive cornerbacks. The oldest was 23 last year. Cook was injured. I think the future's bright for the Vikings. I think they can do good things.
All right. Well, with the Minnesota Vikings, I still don't like their quarterback. Their defense should be a year more experienced. They had a ton of draft picks last year. I think it was like 15 or 16 draft picks, but they have to prove it to me first. I'm not buying their quarterback. I look at them about the same value as I look at the Bears. The Detroit Lions is next.
Detroit Lions are replacing more than 11,000 snaps from last year. They've lost that many players. Wow. I'm a Detroit Lion fan, so I get 15 seconds on this. The spirits are very high, and they're going to have the best offensive line in football within 2-3 years. It's already one of the top. Swift, very underrated. Hawkinson, fantasy tight end pick of the year, probably. There is optimism in Detroit, but they're not going to do much this year.
Detroit's one of the most faded teams this year. Go tell that to the man that has probably the biggest chip on his shoulder, and Jared Goff, who gets to play in a dome. Let's move on to the next division then. And let's go with the NFC South. We'll start with the New Orleans Saints that had the best record in the division.
They were my best team in the NFL last year. They had bad breaks. I almost abandoned them when Breeze left, and I forgot Breeze was useless last year anyway. They shouldn't have had him in the lineup in the playoffs, and I think they would have won if they hadn't have had him in. I'm starting to become more optimistic on the Saints that they have enough to do okay. I abandoned them initially.
I took their under in the win total. They just couldn't afford all their players, let a ton go. They're not going to have a lot of depth. I don't like the two quarterback situation with Winston and Taysom Hill. I think that's going to be an issue going throughout the season. I think it's going to confuse the team. But Sean Payton has proved me wrong. Let's move to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, our Super Bowl champions.
Autopilot. All 22 starters back. We've seen this movie.
Tom Brady, betting against Tom Brady has not been profitable. Let's move on to the next one in the Carolina Panthers, and this one's interesting.
I'm optimistic about them. I love the coaching. Boy, if they stay healthy, Darnold could really surprise. Their season can go. I don't think their season will be a complete disaster, but I think they could outperform expectations.
Yeah, I'm very high on the Carolina Panthers. I always like Matt Rule. I scratched my head over the Bridgewater stuff a little bit that happened. But at the same time, they picked up Darnold, and maybe this is a good second chance for him. I'm bullish on the Panthers. Atlanta Falcons is next.
Ugh. I think they should have dumped. I think they should have drafted a quarterback. They're staying with Ryan too long. They're a better team. They should have won 4 or 5 more games than they did last year. They're a better team than what their record was last year. But I still think they're in that they're not rebuilding like they should.
Their expected win total was really close to what the Browns was, but one record was 4 wins and the other one was like 12 or something like that, 11 or 12. I will say that I think getting rid of Julio Jones and getting Kyle Pitts is just robbing Peter to pay Paul. So that's my thoughts. Well, let's move on to the NFC West then. And to make it fair, I'll start first here. The Seattle Seahawks is the top team. I'm going to say that Russell Wilson might be on the way out next year, and I'm still extremely concerned for their defense.
You know what? I've never been good with Seattle. I really don't think much of them. I didn't think much of them last year, and they outperformed. They started the season really well, but they're a nothing burger for me. I don't like them.
The LA Rams, now with Matt Stafford, is expected to rule the world. My thoughts on the Rams, I am bullish on the Rams, but I'm not overly bullish because that division is very tough, and I have to figure that some of these coaches have to figure out McVay.
They didn't replace the starters they lost last year. Stafford doesn't win big games. They're all drinking the Kool-Aid, and just as many Lions fans are rooting for Stafford as Rams fans this year.
Take it from a Lions fan right there. So all great points. The Arizona Cardinals, I'm concerned for their coach because he needs to get to the playoffs. There's extra pressure here. And I'm kind of worried that Kyler Murray is kind of a one-trick pony, and he's in a very tough division. I like J.J. Watt, but I'm not sure if they can stop the run.
It just wish they would have addressed their draft needs. They didn't fill any of their holes. When I was reading up on them, I'm like, boy, this is a team that can really do something, until you really dig deep and realize they didn't fill the holes they needed to. But there's potential there.
The San Francisco 49ers, most injured team last year. Why the hell are you switching your quarterback when you're ready to win now?
I'm very optimistic on San Francisco. I think they've got a good. I think they'll get their act together somehow, some way.
All right, let's move on to the NFC least, or the NFC East is what it's really called. The Washington football team will start out there. Awesome defense. I expect their defense even to be better. Love Riverboat Ron. I think Fitzmagic just might be the guy that's needed to bring this team deeper into the playoffs.
The Washington can go any direction this year. I could see anything happening, but they have that strong defense that's going to keep them in games, and I still think it's a free for all.
The New York Giants is next, and Saquon Barkley was injured. I think it's time for Danny Dimes to step up, or he's going to move out along with Jason Garrett. I'm cautiously optimistic on the Giants.
Giants, my only future, 5-1 to win the division, just because I think anybody can win that division. They're going to have a top 10 defense that keeps them in games. Added Galladay, Barkley's back. If Danny just has an average season, the Giants could have a decent year.
All right. And the Dallas Cowboys are next. And I think that their coach is terrible, Mike McCarthy. I think that there's still a bunch of holes on this defense. And I think Dak Prescott, the quarterback, is a 3-quarter bust and a 1-quarter great quarterback.
This is the first year we're not hearing Dallas on every show, which is kind of nice. They're just sitting back in the grass, and it may be because they're that bad, but maybe they had a lot of holes to fill. But they had a lot of injuries last year. I'm more optimistic that they'll do better than last year. I'm optimistic.
Hope so. 6 wins. Philadelphia Eagles are next. And I believe that Jalen Hurts is a great guy, but I'm not sure if he's an NFL quarterback. But however, I am not as low as some people are on this Eagles team. But I still think they'll finish possibly last in the division.
Philadelphia just has always been a confusing team for me. I think they're closer to rebuilding than advancing, but if they get early season success, that changes their strategy. So we'll have to see.
Let's move into the AFC then. We'll start with you first. Buffalo Bills in the AFC East.
Every season has one of those teams that you're saying we won't see them there again. I think Buffalo is one of those teams we're going to definitely keep seeing. I'm a believer in the Bills.
I'm very bullish on the Bills, and even though lots of the public is bullish as well, I see in this team kind of what Kansas City was a few years ago myself, and I believe that another NFL player said that, but I agree with it. So just let you know, I'm considering a future on the Bills. Next team we have is the Miami Dolphins.
The Dolphins were one of my bread and butter teams last year. And so I love them, but I am down on them this year. I just don't have any confidence in Tua. I don't know what they're going to do.
Going to be a great defense. I'm real scared for the offense. And
Yeah.
why are you promoting the two guys under the offensive coordinator that you fired to be co-offensive coordinators? I have no idea. Next, New England Patriots.
I think New England comes back and does some damage this year. I wish they had any other quarterback. Maybe they can get I forget the guy they drafted, but I'm not a Cam fan at all. But I'm optimistic that the Patriots will come together.
They spent the most money in the offseason, finally. Imagine if they were doing that with Brady around. But I think they come on hot, then they completely fade, then Mac Jones finally starts. I'm thinking like an 8 or 9 win season for them, but I'm not thinking it's going to be anything masterful. Next team is the lowly New York Jets.
Pass.
Do we get a pass?
I don't know. It's a new rule. I'll tell you, I don't know what to make of the Jets. I just wait and see. Wait and see.
That's good enough. I'm going to say the New York Jets. I'm very concerned about Zach Wilson, that he had the 104th easiest schedule in college football last year, and he's very thin. I'm very concerned for that. However, I think their coach is awesome, Robert Saleh. And I think even though the narrative will be unders, I think that unders are going to hit with this team the first couple weeks. Next one, we have the NFC West or AFC West. Kansas City Chiefs are number 1.
Another locomotive. They should. A lot of people think they'll be down because they lost the Super Bowl. I think that just inspires them more. And I haven't done the deep dive into all these teams, but it just seems like they've reloaded and added.
I don't know how many more years Mahomes can keep carrying them, because he just does things that look impossible. But now with Clark in trouble with the gun charges, the fact that they had to pay some players, some transitions, I'm concerned for the Chiefs more than you. I would say more than you are coming into this year. Next team we have the Las Vegas Raiders, and I'm sure Chris is going to go to all their games.
When is that team ever going to change? John Gruden, what a disappointment. I really like that guy. And I think he's proven that he doesn't know what he's doing. So
narrative on the Raiders is that they got rid of 3 offensive linemen. Don't forget that the couple guys that they're replacing have been first-round draft picks and been sitting. One of them has been sitting on the bench ready to fill in anyway. So I'm going to squash that narrative a little bit, but I am still very concerned with the quarterback. I think he's very inconsistent in Carr. Next team, we have the public darling, the LA Chargers.
Oh, I'm looking forward to seeing what they were going to do this year. I hope Belichick would go there, because I thought that they had more to work with than they do, but they've got some things. I want to see. Herbert did not do well when he wasn't under pressure. We all know he was great under pressure. What's going to happen? And another thing, we have fans this year. So is that going to change any of the performances of people that did well last year?
I'm agreeing with the public on the Chargers, and I think that they deserve the momentum. I love Lombardi, who was a Sean Payton guy coming in to call the plays. I like their defensive-minded coach that was under Fangio for all these years. I am bullish on the Chargers. I'm just not sure how much of a future bullish I am yet. Still contemplating that one. Denver Broncos.
I cannot believe I hear people say that team's no good. I'll leave it at that.
Fangio has to put up or shut up, or he's gone this year. I'm very concerned that I am underestimating them myself, because that's where my mind has been going. And maybe that's some of the things that Chris talked about earlier in this podcast. I have no idea. Something I'll have to reassess, but I'm not bullish on them, but they do have a lot of stars on this team, and Drew Lock is fighting for a position. A little embarrassing with all the Rodgers talk. I'm going to leave it at that. Let's move on to the next division then. We have the AFC North. and I'll get started here with the Pittsburgh Steelers. Pittsburgh Steelers market does not like them whatsoever. Their expected win total was smaller, but at the same time, if I had to take any future price in this division, I would be betting the Pittsburgh Steelers at plus 400.
I like what I'm hearing about Ben getting into better shape. It's something he hasn't done at all ever in the past. He fought to stay with that team for a reason. They've got some problems with their line, but they've got a winning atmosphere there, and I think I'm not dismissing them. I'll just leave it at that.
The Baltimore Ravens slightly underachieved last year to what the expectation was, but at the same time, they still had a very high expected win last year. I don't know when people are going to finally follow the Titans' philosophy when they play this team, but I have to figure that they're going to keep fluttering out at the end.
I'm always optimistic with Baltimore for some reason. They make me money during the regular season. I don't know what to make of them this year yet, though.
All right. Next one's the Cleveland Browns. People are very optimistic about the Browns from what happened last year, but as I teased earlier, their expected win total was under 8 games on a 16-game season. I think that people are a little bit too bullish on this team, and there's going to be a lot of pressure. If anything, I'm looking under.
I think that the Browns are overestimated and underestimated more than any other team, and I think that they can go either direction more so than any other team. It's going to be interesting to see Odell back and seeing a couple more weapons available on offense. I'm interested to see if they can come back and do it again.
Very fair statement. The Cincinnati Bengals are next, and Joe Burrow coming back from an injury. I'm concerned with him, and I'm concerned with his confidence, and I don't know why they didn't go with Penny Sewell. They just wanted to get flashy and get his receiver that went against weak SEC defenses.
I was very disappointed they didn't draft to protect their investment. I think it's idiotic. How can you not protect your investment? It shows me there's something wrong. So I love Joe Burrow, but there's some wrong thinking there.
NFC or AFC South, the Tennessee Titans were at the top of the division. And my thoughts on the Titans are that even though they did get Julio Jones, I think their value shot up more than it should be. They still have issues in the secondary, and they did lose Jonnu Smith.
Tennessee's got no defense. You don't have defense. It's hard to win, and I don't think Tannehill can keep up being at the very top statistically for quarterbacks endlessly. There has to be some regression.
One of those strange over teams that are a very highly run team last year, it seems. Next one is the Indianapolis Colts. Carson Wentz is coming in with a chip on his shoulder, teamed up again with Frank Reich, which I believe was the true brains behind the Eagles' Super Bowl year. I'm high on the Colts, and I also like their defense.
I'm another team. People either think they're going to do great or they're going to be just complete garbage. I lean that they're going to be okay, but the captain's gone. They've got some adjustments to make, but I like the foundation and the coaching.
The Houston Texans have maybe the lowest since the Deshaun Watson situation, the lowest appeal to the market. You know, people are very down on the Texans. In my opinion, I don't know how much lower it can go. They did sign a ton of mediocre guys, but this is, in my opinion, a blow-up year. There's absolutely no way I could bet the over on this team.
I'm wondering how angry I'm going to be that I didn't bet the Houston under 4 at the end of the season. I'll just leave it at that. I see no hope for them in the least, and I've been looking at 4.5, 4, doing nothing with it.
Finally, we ended up with the 1-win Jacksonville Jaguars this year. Now have a much higher win total. I am selling the Jaguars this year. Urban Meyer is a college quarterback, and he hasn't shown me anything that he can change that. There's a reason that his quarterbacks come into the NFL and fail. And I think it's just the spread, fast-paced offense with 5-star talent that's carried him. And this goes back through his Florida coaching days. I'm down on them their first year.
I think Jacksonville had a much better team than people realized last year. There was something there, but first year coaches coming from the NCAA just don't have a winning track record, and that's going to be something to overcome. I think it's going to be just a get to know you process, trial and error season with no expectations.
Right. All right, man. Well, we just got through that. That was a fun little exercise, Chris. I really enjoyed hearing what you had to say about these teams, and we didn't have too much disagreement there.
Well, I haven't done any of my work. I'm actually starting to panic. I haven't even gone through the teams. That's why I was curious what would come out, because I have a lot there was a few teams where you contradicted me, which is good to know. I mean, I'm going to find it out later, but I'm just going off of instinct and peripheral noise and just predisposition of what I think, and that's it.
Yeah, absolutely. No, and that was great though, because your disposition from last year is probably better than anybody else's, being how good you did in these tournaments and how profitable you've been in the NFL, Chris. Well, you did give out a free play in there too. So I'm sure my listeners thank you for that. It was a nice little 5-1 on the Giants. If you guys didn't hear that, Mr. Las Vegas Chris is very bullish on the Giants in this division, and why not? I mean, this division is pretty wide open when the Washington has its issues on offense and the Giants have to put up or shut up. So,
I wouldn't say bullish is the wrong word. I just think at 450 or 5-1, I think there's good value there. I think I could make a case for any one of those teams in that division to win. And see, that's another thing when you talk about season wins and such. The narratives change so easily on each of these teams. People forget it doesn't take much to change a whole season. It takes so little sometimes to send teams into tailspins or to send them soaring. And just something to remember. Pay attention to the little things.
Absolutely. And we'll leave on that note, Chris. Thank you so much for coming on the Odds Breakers. I learned a ton. I'm sure our listeners did as well. Where could they follow you or find some of your great information?
Twitter, Las Vegas Chris without an H. And that's where I am.
That's where he is, guys.